Okay. Hi, everybody. Glad to see you here. We'll probably have more people joining as we go. I'm Sharon Fischel with the Alaska Department of Education in Juneau, and I am very pleased today to introduce our two speakers, Carolyn and Christina, and they will introduce themselves as we get started.
Thank you so much, Sharon. We're really excited to be here today. Carolyn, if you could go ahead and move us forward, I want to welcome everybody. So we are here as part of the series titled Listening to Scientists and Our Grandmothers' Wellness at Work. And I'm really thrilled to be able to welcome you to today's topic, which is connecting to care, making relationships a priority. I am just a huge fan of this body of work. We are going to talk it through together in terms of not only kind of why this self-care and collective care is so important, especially right now when we may be feeling depleted and really benefit from tapping into some proven strategies to reconnect with our resilience, to fortify our resilience. But some of these topics, I feel like when you hear about them, like, hey, guess what? Supportive relationships are really important to your well-being. It kind of makes you feel like, yeah, duh, Christina. But every time I unpack the science behind it, I learn something new and I find a new way to invest in my own wellness. And so that's really what we're going to be doing today, kind of making the case for why we want to invest in supportive relationships based on not only the common sense of our grandmothers, but what some of the research says, as well as connect to some concrete tips, tools, and strategies, and then practice them together today before we leave. So that's a lot to do in an hour. And I wanted to go ahead and start by introducing myself, and then I'm going to pass it over to Carolyn, and then we're going to have an opportunity to kind of do a short introduction or team builder together. So as Sharon mentioned, my name is Christina. I'm Christina Borbely. I've been working with Alaska Department of Education since 2014, and I absolutely feel so grateful for the work that's happening in Alaska to support students, to support schools in bringing mental health supports and wellness to students and their families. And this year, when I connected with the team, it became incredibly apparent that investing in the wellness of everyone on campus was going to be essential. It's always been essential, now more than ever, and we have the resources to do it. And so Carolyn and I teamed up to build this series on what do we know works when it comes to wellness. And as I mentioned before, my background is in developmental psychology, looking at risks and vulnerabilities and what types of strategies help individuals and help groups of individuals tap into resilience. And so supportive relationships has always been on that list of protective factors. But I have to say, as I'm exploring my own wellness practices, one of the things that I'm realizing is that maybe how I show up in relationships could be better. In the sense that I tend to lean into caregiving and nurturing roles without necessarily paying close attention to reciprocity in those relationships. And that's one of the things that I've learned from building out this curriculum and from building out this series is that's an opportunity for me to kind of look at where there are balance points and what can I do for my own wellness. And so the reason I wanted to share that as part of my introduction is because while I am a passionate and longtime ally of what's happening around mental health and well-being, I'm still very much a student of the practice as well. And so I'm here with you as a peer and as a champion, and so that we can learn together how we can continually restore ourselves and replenish ourselves so that we can keep showing up as nurturers and as caregivers. So that's what I wanted to share with you all. Again, a lot of the motivation that I have for my work comes from my family, in particular my grandmother, and you see a picture of her here. She, along with Carolyn's grandmother, was an inspiration for this work. And Carolyn, I'm going to pass it over to you to do your introduction.
Sure. Thank you, Christina. My name's Carolynn, and I thought for my introduction, because we're talking about supportive relationship, I would tell the story of how I got here today, which began during a conversation 20 years ago. I speak with a stutter, and during that time, I could barely even speak because I stuttered so intensely. And so my two options were, I thought, to find a cabin in the woods and be a hermit, or to hide out in academia. And so I asked one of a physiology professor if I could do an independent study with him over the summer on some brain development, what was being discovered about the brain development of babies and young children. I couldn't wait to dive in, and he said, yes, you can. And I'd like you to focus on the chemistry of bonding and attachment. And at the time, that just felt like a fluffy, gushy topic that didn't sound very fascinating, but the books he gave me to read opened up this whole field for me on the chemistry of human relationships and how things like oxytocin can reduce our anxiety response, and how we are not machines. We are truly human beings who co-regulate, and how we just impact one another, whether we like it or not. That's my introduction. Christina, can I hand it back over to you?
Thanks, Carolyn. And I'm so glad that you didn't become a hermit in the woods. You're one of my favorite supportive relationships in my life. So thanks for sticking it out. And I wanted to just welcome all of you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the work that you do and taking some time this afternoon to invest in your own wellness. I wanted to invite you to think about and hopefully share in the chat folks in your life, elders, grandparents, who have been supportive, who have contributed to your resilience, have contributed to your wellness, who are kind of a touchstone for you. And that could be somebody who's in your family, a mentor, a colleague, someone from the workplace, or someone from outside the workplace. We'd very much like to hear from you, kind of who are those cultural touchstones that count as supportive relationships. And the reason that we're particularly interested in that is because, as I mentioned, much of this work that we're doing today has been inspired by our respective elders. And so we like to just kind of build that in and weave it through the conversation that we're having together today. And so if you want to go ahead and add to the chat kind of who comes to mind when I put that in there, we will have it and be able to pull from that for the rest of our conversation today. Carolynn, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and move us forward, because I know that there's a lot to say about why this topic is important.
Sure. I'm glancing over at the chat as I go here. I thank you for those that are sharing. I realize that some of you may have already seen this slide, and so bear with me as we go through this introduction. We wanted to begin with what all of us have in common, and that is more than we live in our city or town, more than we live in our house, more than we live in our car. We live in our body, and we share this common experience of being human and living within these bodies of ours, kind of like this. So some days being human may feel like all we can do, but most days we strive for more than just being human, but we strive for being human with health and vitality. Not just for our own benefit, but I think most of us are here today because we've dedicated our lives for being available for the students, for our colleagues, and the people in the community that we care about. But our striving for being human with health and vitality does not happen in a petri dish, unfortunately. Or fortunately, for most of us, we are surrounded by life happening. So some days there are wonderful things like friends who believe in us, and beautiful flowers and trees in bloom, seeing the light bulb come on for a child, colleagues who offer encouraging support. I'm having a hard time with my PowerPoint, just a second. Living lives of purpose. And for most of us, when those living lives of purpose gets a bit too much, there's always a warm dinner and a comfortable bed. I think my PowerPoint's going to jump all of a sudden. Here we go. But life is not all butterflies and ice cream. There's the hard stuff too. So in some moments there are students who are neglected, chronic student behavioral issues, workloads that feel unmanageable, too few resources to help students in need. There may be unsupported managers. And on the hardest days, it can be being in a workplace where we feel ineffective. So when we experience a chronic imbalance between our resources and our needs, I think a lot of us know that the stress can impact our health, both in the short and the long term. And it can also impact how well we take care of ourselves, which is important to consider because we truly do live within these bodies of ours, and how we're feeling impacts not just us, but how well we can work with others as well. So we're gonna go forward. So meanwhile, I love this field of there's scientists that have been researching not just how stress can impact our health and vitality, but the practices we can place within our lives to help us to heal and to buffer the stress from impacting us. The heart of this work that Christina and I have been looking at focuses on the buffers for children that have experienced adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and their families, but these same buffers are relevant for adults as well. And because modern life can get really busy, and it's hard to put our own health towards the forefront, it can be helpful to review these buffers and to help us to justify taking the time to make sure they're within our life. So these 7 buffers that this series is based on, they all of them do 3 things, and many more, but the 3 things that they all do are they reduce stress hormones, they enhance neuroplasticity, and they reduce inflammation in the body, which inflammation is key to so many health disorders, from heart disease to depression. So we're going to be reviewing the science of one of these buffers, supportive relationships. But before we go on, I just have to pause and say that this is one of those lists that some of our grandmothers would roll their eyes at, because they didn't need the scientific literature reviews to know that these have value. I'm going to move on. So before we go on, we just wanted to pause to say that all of us have chapters of our lives, we realize, and there's going to be chapters where it's harder to prioritize these. There's other times where we have the space to do so. So in case you are surviving an injury or nursing young children through the night, just know that we want to honor the chapter that you are in right now. And we hope that you honor that as well with compassion and boundaries. And we also want to honor, again, that many of our grandmothers didn't need the fancy scientists to tell them how to take care of themselves. So 2 weeks ago, we did the first stress buffer, which was quality sleep. Today, we'll focus on the science of supportive relationships. And because the science literature is indicating that of all the stress buffers, that supportive relationships may be the most effective in supporting human health, particularly from healing from stress. We're going to keep it highlighted. So today we are hopeful that after this, you will better understand how supportive relationships support wellness. You'll be able to choose strategies to strengthen connections both at work and outside the workplace. And you will consider how caring for human needs can help buffer stress from impacting health. So we're going to jump in here. I'm going to just look at my time to see how much time I have to talk, like extra stuff.
I think you're doing
I
great.
think I am
Carolynn.
highlighting. What did I do? Here we go. So I love human physiology and how it can, understanding it can help us to take better care of ourselves. But I also love history. And I think with topics like supportive relationships, it can be helpful to look at where we've come so we can consider how our values from the past and things that the quote unquote, the experts told us are not only not true, but may still be impacting our beliefs. I realize you all are up in Alaska, so your history may be different from the other 48 states, but back in like 1924 and around that time period, this was the time of the factories, and there were lots of immigrants. And so the US, the leaders really needed to create people that would be willing to leave their families and work hard. So they called on the behavioralists to help convince Americans of this. So the behavioralists really promoted this idea that we needed to create independent humans from the first couple weeks they were born. So in 1924, the US Children's Bureau published a manual telling parents to only hold their baby if they needed to be fed, and telling them that if they picked up their baby between when they needed to be fed, they could create a household tyrant whose continual demands would make a servant of the mother. And then in 1927, to give another example, Parents Magazine praised a book that claimed children should never be hugged, kissed, or held on a parent's lap. It also said that this book was needed for every intelligent parent. And a couple of decades later, in 1957, if I can get it to advance here, the American Psychological Association gave the Gold Medal Lifetime Achievement Award to a person who asserted that mother love damaged infants. So now, of course, in the current day, we value supportive relationships for our children. And we know that they're essential for children's mental and physical health. So this took so much research to get from the last slide to this slide. And it seems like with the literature that's coming out now, the same thing is kind of happening for adults, where there's a lot of science literature coming out measuring the impact that responsive relationships have on the mental and the physical health of adults as well. The link between social connection and adult health is so robust that many are calling for physicians to begin serving patients about the strength of supportive relationships in their life, just like they ask their patients about how much they exercise and those types of things. So thank you for letting me give the introduction. That was a long introduction. Christina, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Carolyn. And it's just, every time I hear you talk about it, I'm just amazed. And if you want me to take over screen share, I can do that. So I can advance slides. But I wanted to just note that, when I was learning this, and much of it I learned thanks to Carolynn's research, one of the things that came up for me was, okay, I got the message. This is really important. Also, I'm now questioning whether I know what a supportive relationship is. and so I said to Carolynn, I was like, okay, gotcha. And also like, how do I know if I'm in a supportive relationship or in supportive relationships? And so I went back to the research to see like, how are these folks defining this? When they say that it's going to, help with our neuroplasticity, when they say that it's going to improve our immune system function and reduce inflammation and have all of these impacts that we're going to talk about just shortly, I thought, well, okay, the very first thing I need to know is like, what are we talking about? And so when I went back to the research to take a look at what do we mean when we say supportive relationships, I think we all kind of have that gut reaction, or we have that instinct. And if folks want to add to the chat how they define a supportive relationship, I welcome that. And I'm going to supplement it. So what feels supportive to you is definitely the instinct to follow. And I wanted to just highlight a couple elements that I identified when I looked at it. So one has to do with vulnerability and depth. So really about the quality of relationships that you're having. So supportive relationships are those where the level of vulnerability and depth exists within them, that you feel safe in sharing your true self with another person, that you can show up and be who you really are, that you can relax and be your authentic self, and that you can truly see the other person. So that concept of feeling recognized or validated in a mutual or reciprocated relationship. So those were some of the key facets of what do we mean when we say supportive relationships. And I also found some information about what supportive relationships are not, which is also important. So I'm sure no one in here today is too surprised to find out that supportive relationships are not about the number of relationships that you have. It doesn't matter if the nature of that relationship, whether it's friends or family or colleague, it just has to be another human being. And it's really about that quality of time and the closeness that's experienced. And so sometimes we don't have other choices, but to the extent that we can have authentic real world connections with other humans, the more support in that supportive relationship we can experience, right? So the number of followers on Instagram is probably not a good indicator of whether you have truly supportive relationships. You could have both. You could have a lot of Facebook friends, and you could have a subset of those that are your truly supportive relationships where you're having deeper connections and closeness with those folks. And I wanted to, again, kind of highlight, one of the, as I was learning more and more about this research, one of the things that came up for me was, well, hey, as an introvert, like I don't feel like having a ton of people that I have to connect with in my life every day if I want to live a long and healthy life and not be a burden on our healthcare system. But what I learned, again, is it's not so much about the number, but about the quality of that relationship, the closeness, the opportunity to be vulnerable, to feel safe, to feel seen, and to be able to reciprocate that for another person. So that's what we mean when we talk about this next batch of findings. So as Carolyn mentioned, we've come a long way and we're continuing to move along, but we do have so much more research now that shows us why this particular type of relationship is so fundamentally important to our wellness. So we'll talk about the value of it, and then we'll talk about how to build them. And so when we think about the value of it, we have research that shows us that that lack of social support, so missing these really quality relationships in our life, is more harmful than not exercising. So just think about that for a minute, because we just get so many messages about how being active is so critical and important and valuable, even in small amounts. And we know that having supportive relationships is even more important. So isolation and lack of supportive relationships is even more harmful than not exercising. We also have research that shows us that a lack of social support, a lack of supportive relationships is about the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Right? So clear research that shows us it's associated with harmful outcomes about the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And on the more upbeat side, we know that having positive relationships is associated with great outcomes. So folks who have supportive relationships have things like better brain function as they age. They have better physical health. They are happier. Their we want to just highlight here that being socially connected is the best predictor of a person's happiness. And we know that folks live longer. And we'll unpack some of that in some of the specific research that we have in this area. But again, it's kind of indisputable at this point, the value of supportive relationships, not only to children, which is probably who we're thinking about most often when we're thinking about meaningful relationships, positive relationships with adults, but this research is showing us the value of it to us as individuals, to the adults as well. And so I want to talk about a couple of studies that really unpack this. So the first one is a meta-analysis where some researchers at Brigham Young University examined almost 150 articles published on the effects of human interactions on health outcomes. And what they reported was that social connections, and let me just be clear here, social connections with friends, family, neighbors, or colleagues improve the odds of survival by 50%. So high social support and social integration were associated with the lowest relative odds of mortality compared to many other well-accepted risk factors for death, for example, cardiovascular disease. And in this article, there's this just powerful demonstration of how much connection there is between our quality social interactions and relationships and our own individual health. And I want to point out here that while probably most of our grandmothers or elders did not review almost 150 research articles, I bet almost all of them would have come to the same conclusion, that our relationships are important, that they matter, and that, you know, we see that in our advice. I know my grandmother was always keen to stay in touch, always asking when she was going to see me next, always making a point of reaching out. And that was a relationship that I maintained very closely from childhood all the way through my adulthood, and felt so grateful for, but also grateful for her modeling that for me so that I could model it for others in my life. The other research that I wanted to talk about is this Harvard study on adult health. So there's a lot of outcomes that emerged from this particular study, but I wanted to highlight some of the key findings. It's been going on for 75 years. They've been monitoring over 700 people from varied backgrounds. And what they found were that the people most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 are the healthiest at age 80. And that these social connections at age 50 are a better predictor of later health than cholesterol levels. And so for any of you who dread getting that annual blood work done because you don't want to see your cholesterol levels, think about how much you can offset that with your deep satisfaction with your relationships. The other piece I wanted to share from this study, and there, like I said, there's so much going on in it. We'll talk a little bit about it, but the study's current director said that the clearest message that we get from this 75-year study is that good relationships keep us happier and healthier, period. So you don't have to read any of the other parts of the article. That's the bottom line. Having someone to rely on helps your nervous system relax. It helps your brain stay healthier for longer, and it reduces emotional as well as physical pain. The data are very clear that those who feel lonely are more likely to see their physical health decline at earlier ages and to die younger. So again, really thinking about the connection between who we are is impacted by who we're connected to. So one of the other directors from this study just kind of bottom lined it for us. He said that the first and most foundational element of our health is love. And I want to just pause here because that is not the thing that researchers usually say. And so we put it in a box all by itself just to highlight this amazing precedent that yes, based on all of this work coming out of Harvard University and all of the researchers who are pulling from 75 years of data from over 700 people. And what they have found is if you want to know what's the thing that's going to keep you the healthiest, the answer is love. And the second most foundational element of our health is this. And this is why it gets its own box, that when life is hard or it falls apart, to find a way to cope with life that does not push love away. So keeping those that we're connected to close is most likely to help us be resilient in difficult times. And so we felt like it was particularly important to highlight that for you folks here today, because we are in difficult times. And so if we want to know kind of what is the most efficient and effective way to stay healthy and to invest in our well-being, it's to invest in our relationships. I want to just take a minute and connect that back to what we're talking about here, right? Because this is our Wellness at Work series. And so we thought it would be worth pointing out that this is relevant to our workplace. So not only is there lots of research now to pull from on the impacts on our health and emotional well-being, but also research that shows us how this is connected to the context of our workplace. So what we have is research that shows us that positive social interactions at our workplace directly affect the body's physiological processes. So according to researchers, there's positive social interactions serve to bolster, this is going to be like a whole lot of fancy words, like we started with like love and don't push love away when you're having a hard time. And now I'm going to say a whole bunch of researchy jargon that our grandmothers would never say, but get ready for it in case you're the scientist type. These researchers tell us that our positive social interactions bolster physiological resourcefulness by fortifying our cardiovascular, immune, and neuroendocrine systems through immediate and enduring decreases in cardiovascular reactivity, in strengthened immune system responses, and healthier hormonal patterns. So that was a mouthful of sciencey stuff, but let's boil it down. To put it simply, when employees experience positive relationships, the body's ability to build, maintain, and repair itself is improved in both the workplace and in non-work related leisure and resting times. Right? So a strong case for building connections within our workplace environment, for creating cultures of care, for creating collective care on campus within our teams and with our colleagues. And so again, we wanted to just kind of lay the groundwork for what the science says, what we know our grandmothers say, and then also bring it back to you. And so kind of sharing what we have put out there as the value of supportive relationships. We wanted to just take a moment here and open it up for conversation about where you feel supportive relationships fit into our current cultural values, our current societal values. And how do you know that? And so I'm going to ask folks to unmute and share, or to put in the chat kind of what their experiences are about how the messaging that they receive, the models that they look at, the examples that they find about the importance of supportive relationships. Does anyone have any examples that they want to share?
This is Heather. I was really thinking about my colleague, Asinok Janet Johnson in Lower Yukon, who is free. I think her mantra is always coming back to elder wisdom and advice, which is love. And so when I saw that that was the #1 most foundational element, I was like, yep, elders nailed it.
Every time. When are we going to learn? We don't even need to read those boring articles anymore. Thank you, Heather. Anybody else want to share how this shows up in their community, in their cultural traditions, in their family, maybe in their schools? I wanted to share an example from my own family. So when my son was a teenager, actually, this has not changed. My son is no longer a teenager. He's a full-grown adult who plays video games. But when he was a teenager playing video games, and he would play online with his buddies, they would play these ridiculous zombie apocalypse games where they would have to collectively try and escape zombies attacking them. And he would play this at the kitchen counter while I was making dinner, and I knew his friends that he was playing with. And so he was playing with his one friend, Alex, and they got themselves in some sort of predicament. And Parker was not going to be able to get Alex out of the situation and also save himself. And so I could hear him saying, "I'm sorry, Alex, I can't get to you. I can't get to you. I have to go. I have to go." And he started to leave. And usually I do not get involved in video games, but I looked at Parker and I said, "You will not leave Alex behind. You will go and get him because he is your friend." And he did, and they both died. But it was an important opportunity to really kind of make good on those supportive relationships. Like, when can we count on people? And whether it's in a virtual reality situation or whether it's in a real life situation, when we get ourselves in hard spots, really being able to reach out. And Parker really found that, I thought he was going to be annoyed with me, but he actually found it like really compelling, almost like he felt like he knew he shouldn't leave. And then when someone else, like a real world voice, encouraged him not to, it felt better to him to realize, like, you're right, I can't leave Alex behind. Did I see that someone had a hand up?
Brandy had her hand up. Do you want to unmute and share, Brandy?
That'd be great.
Or Brianna? Maybe it was Brianna.
That was me. So I guess you said in our schools, I'm an intern at an alternative school, and one of the best things that I heard from my agency, my counselor, was she said, sometimes the best thing we can do for these kids is just love them up. And it is something that has stuck with me since day one. Like, don't get me wrong, like I know love it, that's part of like my own family thing. It's always very very comforting and loving, and in food, and unfortunately sometimes in food, right? But when she said that, putting it into the perspective of, sometimes that's just what the kids need and to succeed in life, it like hit me in a spot that even like right now, I get a little choked up over it,
Brandy, thank you for sharing that. And I will just say, I think sometimes that's what the adults need too. And so I'm just so appreciative of you sharing that. And thank you for the work that you're doing with our young people. Brianna, did you want to share as well?
Yeah, I was just thinking, especially as you were putting up the statistics earlier, or I guess it wasn't statistics, the history narrative earlier about how sort of in the predominant American culture, ideas about child rearing have shifted over time. And you talked about the idea that was pervasive for a while about how you don't like pick up and hold your infants because they'll become, and the language I think was, a tyrant in the house. And I was just thinking about how totally opposite my experience of child rearing out in the villages where I work is. And at first it really threw me, because even though we're all these years later from that, I totally grew up with this idea that when you have a baby, you have to really think about their schedule, and there's this science to it, and you don't pick up your baby when they're crying because it trains them to cry and be needy all the time. And out here, like I have my sister-in-law who has this little baby, and she always calls her baby Bossuk, which is like, the English word boss with the Inupiaq ending UK to say like, this is my little boss person. And that's endearing and loving, and how you think of your baby. And I was thinking about how like in Shishmarv, where I used to live, they'd always tell you on your birthday, don't forget to be the queen, don't forget to be to be bossy. And they'd use that word bossy in a positive, like, you tell people what you need and what's going to make you happy. And that's just a part of what is valued in the children, that like, they'll tell you what you need and what'll make them happy. And you'll respond to that naturally, because that's what we would do for each other, obviously.
Sure. And I think, as we're bringing this back to our own self-care practice, and Carolyn, I'm getting ready to turn it over to you so that we can translate this into what our practices that we can engage in, so that we can kind of refamiliarize ourselves or adapt some of the things that we're doing for our young people in our own practices with our adult to adult supportive relationships. And just this idea of being able to communicate to our adults, to our peers who are our supports, what our needs are, right? Like letting people know this is what I need from you to feel supported right now, and also to be able to hear it. So being able to listen and really hear what people are asking for, so that we can kind of meet them where they are and be supportive for them. Carolyn, will you move us forward and share with us what we know are some of the strategies that we can engage in to really practice this and make sure that we're investing in our supportive relationships?
Can you hear me? I'm not unmuted. I imagine that all of us have lots of really like meaningful ways that we nurture supportive relationships within our life. And please, if you're willing, put those in the chat, because we could all, I think, probably use some more ideas. These are some of the overarching ways. It's just simply intentionally invest in quality connections with others, and remind yourself that supportive relationships are part of your health, and that your health has value. And that foundation can help us because life gets so busy for all of us. So number two, to try to build it into rituals and routines. Like I have a friend that lives an hour from our house, and so we have a Tuesday night walk. This week it's Wednesday, but it's normally Tuesday. And if we're not able to see each other in person, then we will walk while we're on our cell phones. So smile and be kind. Human physiology is phenomenal with smiling. When we give a authentic smile, it changes our physiology and the other person's normally too. I love to walk down the road and see people when their face changes the moment that I smile. It's amazing that how people will look like they're kind of scary to me, kind of shut down. And the moment I smile, 99% of the time, their face just all of a sudden lights up and looks safe. And then this is a bigger arching one, but to practice compassion, gratitude, and forgiveness. And there's a lot there to unpack, but I'm going to move us forward. So tips for nurturing supportive relationships with our colleagues. Again, please consider putting some of your ideas in the chat. Here are some of ours. To know the value of your smile. So like we said in the last slide, our physiology changes when somebody smiles at us. It helps us to feel safe and connected. It changes our autonomic nervous system. Having a hard time advancing. Oh, here's all of them together. Express your gratitude verbally, regularly. Everybody has an opportunity to help other people feel safe and seen just by expressing your gratitude. You can keep thank you notes in your desk. This is something that I learned from my father, but we also saw this when we were researching ideas. To schedule time to build relationships. I think Christina is really good at this. Like when we do a work call, she's really good about beginning it with a time period just to talk about how we're doing, to schedule that time in before we jump into all the other things we need to deal with, to focus on people's words. This is part of mindfulness, to change, to quiet the chatter that's in your brain and just listen, and to highlight colleague successes. That's another way.
Thanks, Carolyn. And I want to just acknowledge that, our tips and strategies seem really concise because, everyone tells you not to put text-heavy slides in front of a group. And there, as Carolyn mentioned, there's so much to unpack behind them. And so we do have deeper resources on any of these, or all of these, I should say, if you're interested. And you can just ping us in the chat or follow up with us later. But a lot of these things do take intention, and they do require us to be proactive, whether we're focused on building our own wellness practice or whether we're focused on contributing that to our colleagues and our teams. But we wanted to go ahead and put some of this into practice today. So I want to flag for everybody, hey, tune in. We're about to do an activity together. Carolyn, if you could go ahead and stop screen share for just a moment. What we're going to do, I'm going to ask everyone to participate in this, but don't worry, you don't have to report out or share if you don't want to, although that will be an option. It's a 2-minute activity. We could probably even do it in 90 seconds, but we're going to take 2 minutes to do it together today. And what we're going to do is invest and build in our work relationships by writing a thank you. And so this is a practice that one of the researchers who I'm really beginning to appreciate as a new resource, his name is Sean Achor, A-C-H-O-R. And it's one of his 5 strategies for building happiness, including through supportive relationships. And he takes 2 minutes each day and writes a thank you, an appreciation, a gratitude. And that could be a Post-it note, it could be a thank you card, it could be an email, it could be a text message. And in this particular exercise today, we're going to do it for someone that we work with. So I'd like you to think about someone that you want to express appreciation to, and it could be for something little, it could be for something big. And we're going to take 2 minutes together to just jot that down. And then afterwards, well, I'm going to invite folks to share either who they wanted to appreciate or some of those words of appreciation. So I'm going to go ahead and start my timer right now for 2 minutes. So if folks want to open their email browser, if folks want to pull open their desk or grab a sheet of paper or a Post-it note, again, it doesn't need to be fancy, and we're going to do it in under 2 minutes if we get started right now. I'm going to do this exercise with you if you wonder why I'm looking down at my screen. Oh my goodness, it's already ready to go. So if folks want to just wrap up. My timer let me know. So I'm going to go ahead and share mine in the chat. Find my send button. And I want to encourage folks who want to unmute and share either who or what you want to show appreciation for. And I want to just say it's 90 seconds to 120 seconds of a day, and it invests in our supportive relationships by really demonstrating gratitude, compassion, really making a point to see the other person for something that they contributed in a positive way. So anybody want to share any example that they worked on during this 2-minute exercise?
I can share, Christina. This is Sharon. I would like to share an appreciation to Christina, because over the last, I've known Christina since probably 2014, and she's always that, and you'll have to excuse, my dog has grabbed the most loud toy we have in the house right now to bring it to me.
I'll accept that as the appreciation. Thank you. Thank you, Izzy.
She's always there to talk me off of the ledge when I get some information that is information I probably should have had 2 months ago, but just got it and it's due tomorrow. So I appreciate that Christina's always there to say, Sharon, it's calm down. It'll be all right. We'll figure this out. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Sharon. This was not a planned exercise
Nope.
to send gratitudes to Christina, but I see Carolyn shared one as well. Thank you, Carolyn. As folks may have noticed, I work with people that I hold dear, which I feel very grateful for. Anybody else want to share either about what they wrote or about how it felt to do this practice?
I started an email to my colleague Jenny, who just planned this enormous statewide conference and then hosted it. And that's what I started to thank her for. And then I realized, no, wait, my gratitude really is for the time she and I had together after the conference. So I thought that was interesting that I first went to like the bigger global thing. And then I thought, no, really what I'm grateful for was this personal one-on-one time together.
Oh, I like that. Thank you, Heather, for sharing that. And I want to encourage folks to actually send these. So this isn't one of those esoteric exercises. The idea of building supportive relationships is that they involve actually connecting with the other person. And so if you need to do a little bit more finessing and zhuzhing before it goes out, fine, but the point is to really keep it at 2 minutes or under, and that might take a little bit of practice, and to do it on a daily basis as a way to proactively and intentionally build those supportive relationships. So Carolyn, I'm gonna, I think we're close to wrap up and I'm gonna hand it to you for that.
Okay, so the takeaway from this is, if you are human, it's okay to take care of yourself by prioritizing supportive relationships in your life. And it's not just you that stands to benefit. As you work so hard to support youth, it's okay to take time to care for yourself and for colleagues. Our hope is that through this series and through the things that we do within the workplace, that we can build infrastructures for cultures of collective care, where it's okay to take time to take care of our basic human needs. So this was the supportive relationships module of this series. And we're hopeful that you can take this information from both scientists and the wisdom of our grandmothers, maybe to set 1 or 2 routines within your week to value this need. I'm going to go back one slide. In 2 weeks, we'll be doing the next module, which is self-compassion. And finally, references for all the content today is available. Sharon, can I hand it back over to you?
Yes, thank you everybody for joining. Hopefully we'll see you all in a couple of weeks. Have a good evening and a good Veterans Day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.